All right, today we're talking about some of the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and building one of the most iconic brands, UGG, which I'm sure you've seen a million times before. My guest today is Brian Smith. He's the founder of UGG. I'll tell you more about him in a second, and we'll hear his story in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the show, and every week we have great CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies, iconic companies like Netflix and Grubhub and Gusto and Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, many other episodes there as well. Today is no exception. Before we get to that, this episode brought to you by our company, Rise 25, where we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping companies to run their podcast and content marketing. We are the easy button for a company to do that. We do the strategy, accountability, and full production. In fact, we invented what some are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting. It's our platform, Podcast Copilot. And to learn all about it, you can go to our website, rise25.com, and learn all about what we do there. All right. I'm excited because my guest today is Brian Smith. I've seen him speak a couple times before, and he's got such an amazing presence on stage and stories to tell, and you're going to love it. He's the founder of UGG. He's an Australian-born former accountant who transitioned from a career in accounting to entrepreneurship after getting inspired to do it. He studied at the UCLA School of Management and founded UGG Imports in 1978 with just a few $100s in startup capital, introducing sheepskin boots to the American market. In over about 20 years, turned it into a national brand known for quality and comfort before selling it. We're going to hear his story here today. Brian, so excited to hear you tell this story to my audience. And, I love to know what people were like as a kid and whether they were entrepreneurial. And you were headed to a life in accounting, so you didn't think about that kind of entrepreneurial stuff. But I love this story. You were waiting in line in like lunch counters and calculating gross profit margin in your head. Boy, you were really destined to be an accountant at a young age.
Hey, John, thanks for having me, buddy. It's great to be on a great show. I never had an entrepreneurial bent as I was growing up. And the reason I became an accountant is that, my father wanted me to have a steady job. He was a contractor, and I think he was trying to protect me from all the hard knocks of being working for yourself. So he convinced me to be an accountant, and I didn't know enough about it to reject that idea. So I started out, and it took me 10 years to graduate. And the day I graduated is the day I quit my job, because I found out that I really hated accounting.
Wow.
But as you were mentioning, I even though I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur, I'd find myself at lunchtime in the line waiting for my sandwich at the deli, and I'd be calculating the cost of the employees and the cost of the food and what they were charging, and I'd be running gross profit margins in my head and trying to figure out if it was a good business. And I did that for lots and lots and lots of different scenarios. So I guess I always had some sort of work for myself mentality hidden in me. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell us about the inspiration behind UGG, how you ended up coming up with this idea. So you were a big surfer at the time.
Yeah.
Tell us the
Yeah,
story.
surfing is pretty much part of every kid in Australia who grows up on the coast. So that was not a really big deal, but it did sort of determine where I was going to go with my life. And when I had the aha moment that, all the big trends are coming out of California, I just packed up my bags and headed for LA, because all of the, surf brands and skate brands and water brands and Levi jeans and all these things were coming out of California. And so I thought, I'm going to find the next big one and bring it back to Australia and make my fortune that way. And it was like 4 or 5 months of just hanging out in LA, surfing Malibu pretty much every day, and looking at billboards and the Wall Street Journal and anywhere I could for inspiration for a new business. And it was like just turned October, and the the water had just got cold and the wind was freezing. And after surfing one day with my buddy, I was pulling on my UGG boots that I brought from Australia, and I just got dosed with goosebumps. Like, oh my God, there are no sheepskin boots in America.
Mm.
And 1 in 2 Australians wore some sort of sheepskin footwear. And so I looked at my buddy Doug and said, "Oh man, let's go into business, man. We're gonna be instant millionaires, right?" And everyone listening will know that feeling, you know.
Right, right. And I grew up in Southern California. So I went to high school one town over from Malibu, and
Okay.
every kid in my high school had UGG boots, every
Yeah.
single one, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember it being such a funny thing because, you think of like Southern California as being, known for sunshine and beaches and stuff like that, but we have plenty of cold winters in Southern
Yeah.
California,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
so. So you came up with the idea. So what were next steps after that? If you came up with
Well,
this idea, you
it's
got to go
funny
source the product.
you said everybody in your school was wearing them. It took 4 or 5 years for me to get to that place,
Yeah,
because Americans don't understand sheepskin. They think it's hot and sweaty and you can't get it wet and or muddy or anything like that. But it's really like you cannot rip a sheepskin. They're that tough. So I started opening up a few. Well, first of all, we got shut out at the shoe store level. Not a single shoe store wanted to touch
yeah.
us.
I remember you
Uh,
telling this story. You went from
yeah.
store to store trying to sell them, and you
Yeah,
couldn't interest
and,
them.
and eventually I twigged on the surf shops because all the California surfers who'd been to Australia had bought pairs back for their buddies. So it
Mm.
was pretty well known. So I opened up several surf shops, but just dribbled the boots out for the first year. And the next year I advertised with these models that I hired and put them on the beach at Windansea and posed them with the tall white boots like the major part of the ad. And the sales like went to 15, 20,000. It was should have been way, way more.
So
And the
you'd
next
hired
year,
professional models. I remember this story also. You'd hired professional models,
yeah.
and you'd put all this effort into these like flawless
Oh
ads,
no,
and it
no,
didn't move the
technically
needle.
perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that because that didn't work, the next year I got better looking models, right, and did it all over again. And the sales went to like $30,000, and it got so bad that that following year I was getting summer jobs every year. I was working on a golf course, and I thought, I'm just going to get out of the business. It's too hard. Americans don't get it. It's not working. And then it was like October, and that first storm hit the coast, and I got home after work on the golf course. I was sopping wet, and the answering machine had like 25 messages on it, and everyone was like, Brian. My store's been full of people asking for UGG boots today. The weather's turned and I've run out of boots. Can I come and get more? And every one of the stores that I had open wanted like huge amounts. So I really couldn't even go out of business properly. I called up Australia and ordered another 1,000 pairs and started shipping out to everybody. But the following year, and this is about when you would have discovered UGG, is that instead of doing these fake ads or these ads that I thought were perfect, I called up a buddy who was one of my retailers, and we had a beer and at his surf shop, and I was explaining this advertising dilemma, and he said, "Oh, shut up, Brian." And he calls out back to all these little 12, 13-year-old kids who store their surfboards in the shop, and he said, "What do you guys think of Uggs?" And every one of them just went, "Oh man, those Uggs, they're so fake. Have you seen those models? They can't surf." And
Mm,
instantly I realized I'm sending the wrong image to my target market.
mm,
And when I saw my ads through their eyes, I couldn't believe, I was embarrassed how fake they were.
mm.
And so I called up a buddy, Pete Townend, who is a former world surf champion. He was running a Scholastic Surf Association in Orange County. And I said, "Pete, you got any young kids who are going pro?" And he gave me two guys, Mike Parsons and Ted Robinson. And this time we went to Trestles, which is in San Onofre, and Black's Beach in La Jolla. And each one of these surfs is about a mile to get to the water. And you can only walk, there's no driving. And there's always good surf there. And I figured that every little kid who reads Surfer magazine would just be dying to be walking along that path with Mike Parsons and Ted Robinson, right? And
Mhm.
so I just took a couple of shots with my own little camera and I selected them and ran them in the October November, December issues of Surfing magazine and Surfer, and sales went to 220,000. Like it was just like so easy.
Wow.
And what I'd figured out is that you never advertise your product. You advertise the features and the benefits, and like what I advertised was this scene that every little kid would just die to be walking along that path with Mike Robinson,
Yeah,
right?
it's the kind of the lifestyle, the dream,
Was and
especially
it
for
was
if
like
you're some kid in the Midwest and you're not near the coast. Like imagine that you open up your issue of Surfer magazine, it's like the life you want to be living.
it is totally. And so, in a funny way, we were using influencers, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But what happened then was like every little kid, because the kids have got no money, right? They're all in high school. Mom, all the cool kids in high school got a pair of UGG boots. I need to get a pair for Christmas. And so the mom started walking this, they started with the malls who didn't even know what UGG boots were, but they eventually figured out the surf shops had them. And it was just like a blowout. And so it just made me realize that you must figure out what it is that your target market is looking for. I was trying to ram this photo down their throats, and I was turning off more and more customers than I was ever attracting until I hit that right formula where these kids were just wanting to be in that photo. And I was able to duplicate that into snowboarding because that had just started at that time. And then back east, I got into all the youth hockey programs in the ice rinks. And it was just the most incredible marketing campaign for
When you
me.
say duplicate it, did you look for someone like Mike Parsons, like a similar kind of
Yeah,
equivalent, and
yeah.
just
I
have
in the
authentic photos?
snowboarding industry, we found out who the young kids were. We got a young Canadian. His name escapes me right now, but we got a young Canadian kid, and then back east took me a couple of years because I had no idea what the kids back east did for sport in the winter. And I was with a sporting goods store owner one day, and I said, "Well, what do the kids do?" He says, "Oh, they play hockey." He rolls his eyes. And when I looked into it, I thought, "Oh my shit, hockey's twice as big as surfing." I had no idea because I'm from Australia. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
it down there. And so I found the youth magazine in Minneapolis, and then that sort of brought the whole East Coast on. So
Yeah.
it was a very simple formula, but once it took me 4 years to get it, and once I got it, then I was able to use it in every avenue.
Now, I remember when I saw you speak that you talked about some of the constraints that success brought you. Also, you have to
Yeah,
source more material. You have to get
yeah,
a supplier who can, reproduce it and produce, many more
yeah.
versions at the same quality. Cash constraints. Talk about some of those challenges.
Yeah, well, that's where my greatest lack in the whole business adventure was I didn't understand finance, right? Even though I was an accountant, I didn't understand money and how it works. And so we'd just sell $1 million in 1 year and we're broke, right? So my accountant brain kicks in and says, okay, well, we'll sell 2 million next year. And believe me, after 2 million in sales the next year, we're twice as broke because we had bigger warehouse, more staff, more advertising, more delivery costs. Yeah, the cost of financing the product itself was humongous. And so and this is a real trap for anybody who's in a product-based business. Your success will become your biggest obstacle once you start needing extra finance to buy product, right? You
Yeah.
think you've got twice the orders for next year, and everybody thinks, wow, that's fantastic. But that can be a kiss of death if you don't have your financing in place. And
Mm.
it took me many years to learn that. I'd say that was my biggest failing as a business person was not really having an idea about finance. Back then, there was no EO or YPO or anything like that. And now I've spoken to like 30 EO chapters,
Mhm.
and I always have dinner with the board, and I meet all the people at the events, and I'm amazed at how much knowledge gets passed around within these groups and the forums and everything. And if we had a forum or something, if I had a forum, who knows, I might still own the company today. But that was one of the things I just felt I was Robinson Crusoe out there, the only person that ever had this problem.
Right.
And
And
really, it's the most common problem in business.
and your buddies are surfers, so they're not providing any help.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, so what did you do about financing in cash? Did you
Well,
go to different sources?
Well, it got down. I was too big for friends and family, and the banks wouldn't touch me. They kept, even after 10 years, oh, it's a fad, Brian. I won't be around next year. And it's not a fad. Look at the history we got. Oh, yeah, but fashions change. You probably won't be here next year. So banks were out. And so it just became people who had wealth that I thought I might be able to, get a couple of $100,000 or $500,000
Mm.
invested. And that's pretty much how I sort of leapfrogged it for a couple, probably 8 to 10 years
Wow.
without really getting solid investment in.
Wow. Was it hard to do that and then have these thin margins or not even be profitable and feel like I've got this massive, success on my hands and yet I'm not able
Yeah.
to reap any rewards?
Yeah, that's another issue where I wasn't good because it was a very expensive product. Selling. In a surf shop, you got flip flops, or you got UGG boots, and the cost disparity was incredible. And
Yeah.
so everybody, because the pressure was on for price, I had to have really low margins, and that never helped me. And in fact, when I got my final financing in, the guy who came in with the money looked at the margins and he just looked at me and said, Brian, that's profitless prosperity, right?
Mm.
You're ramping out the sales, but you're not making any money. So what's the point?
Yeah.
Profitless prosperity. And that term stuck with me from then on. And here's the really weird thing. When I finally saw that, I put the prices up quite considerably. Sales didn't get affected at all. They
Wow.
just kept going out the door. So if
Yeah.
only I had known that 10 years earlier, could have
Mm.
been a different business.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it wasn't as premium priced early on because you were concerned about, someone's going to buy a $10 flip-flop
Yeah,
versus a $50 or $100
that's
UGG boot.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I think of it now, you think of it now as it's definitely a premium price product.
It really is. But
Yeah.
they've got a brilliant, when we got that whole fad thing going, like you mentioned at school, when all the schools across the country, were just like inundating the parents are going, well, damn, my daughter should like these, and another one in Minneapolis and say, well, God damn, I got to sit in that ice rink for 2 hours
Yeah.
at 40 degrees. I'm going to get a pair for myself. So
Yeah.
bit by bit, it just outgrew the whole surf market and the snowboarding market, and it became its whole new fashion industry.
Yeah. At what point did you decide it was time to sell?
It was in '94. The beginning of '95, we'd just done about 15 million in sales the previous season, and we'd put out new colors and styles to all of the sales. I had about 30 sales reps all across the country, and they were all doing the regional shows and the big trade shows. It made it look like we were going to need to do $25 million in sales, with all the orders we were getting.
Hmm.
And I knew then that I was lucky I even got to sell 15 million, right? Because I have no financing. And I knew if they're going to expect me to sell 25, I'm going to be out of business. The company's going to fold because I can't raise that sort of money. And ironically, I was going to a trade show in Atlanta and I saw a buddy of mine who had we started out, in the beginning selling to surf shops, and we would see each other coming in and out of surf shops. And he had a sandal which was pink, yellow, pink neoprene, like a flip flop, and they were triple deckers. So he called his company Deckers Corporation,
Mm.
and he ended up taking a bunch of licenses on, and one of them was Tiva sandals, and the outdoor market really took off in the early '90s. And he went with it with his company. He went from like 16 million to 60 million.
Wow.
And on top of the 60 million, he went and took the company public. So I'd been watching him do that. And I saw him in the baggage claim at Atlanta Airport. And I'm going, oh my God, he's sitting on about $30 million in cash.
Mm.
And his business dies every winter, and our company dies every summer. So
Mm.
if we put them together, you've got a 12-month sales force, 12-month administration, 12-month warehouse, and I walked up to him, we high-fived each other, and I said, Doug, if ever we're going to do it, man, now's the time. And so we had the accountants back in California calling each other that day.
Mm.
And it took about 8 months. And it happened to be the year I was selling the company anyway I was looking to sell it. And it just worked out perfectly for him and for me.
And what was it like for you after it sold? There are a lot of founders that ends up being a sad moment for them.
It, I'm going to segue into my book here. The theme of my book, which is a
Birth of the
roadmap for
brand, launching your entrepreneurial passion
yeah.
and soul by Brian Smith. Yeah.
So it's like a roadmap for entrepreneurs. And the theme of it is that you can't give birth to adults, right? You conceive of an idea, you take action, that's the birth. So me buying 6 pairs of samples of Uggs was the birth. And then it just lies there. And it just lies there and it lies there. And it's no amount of feeding or jiggling or playing with it. This infant cannot get up and go to college, right? But eventually it'll start toddling, which is great because people are writing articles about you in magazines, and all your friends are telling all their friends about your product, and then that'll go into the youth phase where you've got production's working and financing is working and admin is working and shipping and warehousing is everything's clicking, and you can run a $20-30 million company in the youth phase. And if it's a great product or a great service, you're going to hit the teenage years. And you can recall as a teenager on a Saturday night, you want to be in every party in town, right? Well, it's the same in business. You want to be in every mass retailer and you want to be in every major trade show, and you can outstrip your capital so quickly and go broke in that. So we were able to get through that and put the controls in, and it became a mature company. So I started out telling you that story for a reason, and you asked me a
Oh,
question.
because I was asking how you felt when you
How I
sold
felt, right.
sold the company.
Right.
Yeah.
So, number one, I was grateful and thankful because I made it through the season and kept the brand alive. Right.
Yeah.
It could have gone dead that year. Right.
Mm.
But I kept the brand alive. And like even today, like last week, I was in Utah at an EO talk in Utah, and I'm walking through the airport, and I'm just noticing how many pairs of Uggs, and I keep looking behind to make sure they got the logo, the Ugg logo.
Because they're knockoffs. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was just so proud of that, and it's like when I sold Ugg, it was like walking my daughter down the
Oh,
aisle
yeah.
and
Yeah.
handing it off to Deckers Corporation
Yeah.
to get married and then go out into the big world. And
Yeah.
they're the ones that took it into the hundreds of millions and the billions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm super grateful, super proud of
You seem
that.
like a very positive guy, so you don't seem like the type that would dwell. So you didn't have a period of depression or anything like that.
Oh, not from the sale. There were many times during the company where I was depressed and wanted to give up. Yeah, many times. But
But
I
not from the
was
sale.
luckily, in fact, in the book, there's like 3 or 4 times when you're going to think, how the hell did he stick around? Why on earth did
Yeah.
he stick around?
Yeah.
But I just had this knowledge that 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear. So it's not the product's problem. It's got to be me.
Mm.
Right? And when I took responsibility for myself, then I started looking for alternative ways of doing things. And there's always one of the pieces of philosophy in my book is your most disappointing disappointments will always become your greatest blessings. And I asked the audience, who in the last 12 months or 6 months has had something disastrous happen in your personal life or your business, and now you look back and think, thank God that happened. I
Hmm.
swear, John, 80%, every single audience, 80% of the people put their hands up.
Right.
So, even though I went through these disasters, it was never the product, it was me. And as long as I took responsibility for that, I was able to figure out a way around it.
How was your family during the time while you're running UGG? And then what was their reaction like after you sold it?
Sure. Well, when I started, I didn't have kids. And when I did have 2 girls, most of my traveling, like I had 30 reps all across the country, and I would go travel with each one had to have their 10 best customers lined up for a visit. And so I was doing like 300 retailers a year for 3 years. And I
Wow.
put up one and a
It's a
half
lot of
million
travel.
frequent flyer miles, right?
Yeah.
And my kids, they were 2 and 4, and then 3 and 5, and 4 and 6. They didn't even know I was gone half the time, right?
Yeah.
So it was the best time for me to be traveling. But after I got back on the road, my family was supportive, even though it took 7 or 8 years for me to actually draw some meaningful salary out.
Hmm.
Though my wife was really supportive of me, and we just made it work.
Hmm.
And yeah, here's the interesting thing. The big fires we just had out here in Brentwood and stuff.
Yeah.
My one thing I did when I was on the road in those very early, when the kids were very young, I every single place I went, I sent them a postcard, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
One each. And I made some funny comment about where I was, right?
Hmm.
And I found out years later that they had these plastic lunch boxes, and she had two each. They were full of postcards, right?
Hmm.
And we were talking about, well, what would happen if this house went on fire, Both of them, I swear, the first thing I'd get, Dad, is my postcards.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
So it's
Uh,
really funny how, 20, 30 years later that sort of backed in. I had no idea how important that was, but turned
right.
out to be a really, really meaningful thing to communicate.
Yeah. After you sold the company and you move into Brian 2.0 or whatever you want to call
Right.
it, how did you square your identity of who you were after that? You talked a lot about I sold the company because we ran into these cash flow issues
Right.
and I
Right.
couldn't figure out, but did you have a vision of what you would be after you sold the company, or did you figure that out later?
No, not really. I stayed on. They wanted me to be VP of marketing, but I don't have a political bone in my body, so I knew I'd never last in a public company.
Yeah.
So I consulted for a couple of years, and during that period, I helped steer that. We'd made a connection with Oprah in my last year of running the company, and I steered that through because when we sent them to her and she just flipped out how good they were and bought 20 pairs for her staff, right? Everyone's saying, "Oh man, let's do a press release," and I'm going, "No, no, 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 no." Because if we had to let the world know that she loved Ugg boots and they all started ordering from us, we would have been dead. I mean, out of business.
Yeah, and there's other companies like that were Oprah's favorite things, and that
Yep.
it couldn't handle the growth.
It's suicide. And
Yeah,
because of the theme, you can't give birth to adults. I spent that 2 years of consulting working on getting, because Decca's had the money, they had 20, $30 million in the bank, and so they put together the production and the capacity and the ability to react. So when Oprah did do her best picks for Christmas and Oprah's favorite things, when she did that, we were ready, and we were able to take advantage of that. And it like overnight into the hundreds of millions. And it
what was
didn't
that?
take.
What was that experience like? Were you involved in that? Did you go? Were you on her show or anything like that? Did you
No,
meet
no,
her?
no,
No,
no.
no, you were gone.
I auditioned, but back then I didn't know anything about public speaking, and
Yeah,
I remember that they came to my house to film me, and I remember droning off about just totally inconsequential shit, and
yeah,
they want now I've learned, had I known how to
yeah,
speak in sound bites, and like today I'm trying my best to keep the story short, to
yeah,
not lose your audience,
yeah.
and if I had known that, I probably would have been on the show, but it happened regardless whether, it didn't need Brian Smith to make it work,
Yeah. What do you think about the world now of launching a product is so different, with
Yeah.
the between social media and, rapid iteration and direct to consumer and all that kind of stuff. Are you advising companies that are launching products today?
Yes, I have a couple of people. One in particular that I mentor is a young lady here in San Diego. She has a lamb leather crossbody bag, and it's called the Sash bag. It's a brilliant product, really, really, really similar to UGG because it's lamb leather and it's just just exquisite to touch, and she's got all the same marketing problems I had. But however, she started selling online from day one,
Yeah.
right? I sold in 95, so the internet hadn't really
Yeah.
started, right?
Yeah.
But even though the means are different, like everything's electronic now, whereas we had paper and colored printing, right?
Yeah.
Now you can put a website out there and look like $1 million company, and nobody knows that you're working out of your garage, right?
Yeah. No
And
idea.
and if you got the right, material, but it still comes back to the fundamentals. So many people put their product out and they think they advertise the product, and nobody gives a shit because you haven't given them why they should have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember my surfer guys?
Yeah.
Why do they want to be in that photo? Oh my God, I'd love to have that product because so the principles haven't changed. It's just that the medium of putting it out there has changed.
What is it like for you? I know you do a lot of speaking. I'm going to see you speak in 2 weeks, in the EO
Great,
LA Valley
great.
chapter, which I'm really excited about. I saw you speak in Washington D.C. You came and spoke to our San Francisco EO chapter.
And you're still not burned out.
I'm not burned out. Still enjoying these stories.
Good.
What is it like for you to go around and to meet with entrepreneurs who are still in the thick of it, still in the struggle, and share some of your stories? What is it like for
It,
you?
it's fantastic because in my talk, especially the EO talk, because I've got different talks for different corporations, right? But with the EO, let's say I've got 15 different takeaways, which nobody really picks up on, but someone in the audience is going to come up to me afterwards and go, "Oh my God, thank you for talking about this. I'm really in this problem with this." And then the next person will come up and say, "Oh my God, thank you for talking about this." It'll be something different, and they probably didn't hear the one that the other guy heard, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone in EO is in a different phase of running their businesses, and when they hear the stories that I talk about, and there's so much philosophy in my book, which I bring out on stage as well, and they go, "Oh, thank you for that." I'm so, I thought I was failing, and now I realize my product's still in the infancy. That's why it's just lying there,
Yeah.
and they can identify and get hope that because I don't talk about all the wins. I don't talk about all the big successful things. I talk about all the disasters
Yeah.
that stopped me dead and how I got around them. And that's
Yeah.
why I think the EO entrepreneurs love the stories so much.
Yeah. I remember you telling me about selling the boots out of the back of the trunk of your car
Yeah,
in Malibu, going to different surf break, from surf break to surf break, selling the
yeah,
boots. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Brian, this has been great. I want to wrap up with my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of gratitude and giving our guests a little bit of space at the end here to thank anyone, any friends, peers, contemporaries, mentors who I know you didn't have a lot. We talked about that earlier, but is there anyone in particular that you would want to thank for helping you in your journey?
Yeah, in fact, you got to meet this guy when you come down because he lives in Calabasas, which is where the next EO talk is.
Yeah.
And that's Doug, my buddy who was surfing with me when I had the revelation that there were no UGG boots in America. Because
Hmm.
he and I started out together, but like when we imported the boots and did the first sales run, our sales for the first year was 28 pairs,
Hmm.
$1,000, and we thought we were going to be instant millionaires.
Yeah.
And and Doug went and got another job, and we stayed friendly the whole time. But it was pretty much me got stuck with the UGG boot business because I had 480 pairs left in my third bedroom, right? But Doug and I have stayed together, and there were lots of marketing ideas that he gave to me that I never would have picked up on for myself. And anyway, because we stayed in touch, and I'm speaking in his neck of the woods, he's going to come to the event
Excellent.
in
Great.
a
Well, that's
couple
my
of weeks.
hometown. That's where my parents live, my brother
Oh,
lives. So I'm,
Bass's
I'm, I'm
great area.
yeah,
I love it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It is right over the hill to
Yep.
from the surf
Yeah.
breaks.
Straight down Las Virgenes Road down to Malibu. Yeah.
Canyon, the Versities. Yeah, you can drive through
Yeah.
all the canyons. Well, some of them are closed, unfortunately, right now because of the fires, but hopefully they'll be
Yeah.
open soon. Yeah. Well, Brian, this has been great. Where can people go to check out your book and check out you and book you as a speaker if they
Sure. Well,
want to?
listen, it's the book's on Amazon, The Birth of a Brand.
Yeah.
And the website has my email at the bottom of it, or it's also at the back of the book, which is brian@briansmithspeaker.com. Yeah, and if any of you are learning chairs or you're friends with the learning chair of your chapter, and I haven't been around in the last 2 years, anything older than that's great because I've got completely new stories. But I would love to come and my goal is to try and speak at all of the EO chapters. I'm about halfway through.
Excellent.
And yeah, I'd love to do that. Or any corporation that you might work with who's got a big sales force or, has marketing issues. I'd love to talk on that because marketing is really my passion. That's what I'm in love with.
Yeah.
And that's what I do.
Yeah. Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, John, pleasure being here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.